On today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, some bad news surrounding linebacker Nakobe Dean, who might be out for the season, mid-season awards, all that and more on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. I'm DiBiase, joined as always by Gino, Cammilleri. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, Monday through Friday. The Eagles on a much-deserved bye week this week, 8-1, a huge gritty, close win on Sunday against the Dallas Cowboys, which, Gino, is actually the most watched game on national television since Eagles-Chiefs in the Super Bowl. Huge win. The whole country was watching. Really sets them up for a deep run through November to January. So today, thought we'd take a look back after 9 games, do some mid-season awards. Unfortunately, we got to get to some news first surrounding linebacker Nakobe Dean, dealing with the old Liz Frank injury that's going to likely put him on IR, I would imagine, for the season, although the NFL rules now do allow a player to come off IR more than once, which never was the case before. But he's probably out for the year, trying to seek a second opinion regarding surgery. Just disappointing news for Nakobe, a guy we had so much high expectations for this year. I personally thought was going to be one of the steals of the Eagles' last 5 draft classes, a day one talent they get in the third round, maybe one of your best linebackers you've had in a long time. And it just has not worked out that way because of injuries, and on the field, he really just has not done much.
When we get into the offseason, I think we're going to have a legitimate discussion about these guys that still have these injury history lingering over them. Guys like Dallas Goedert, guys like Avonte Maddox.
Yeah.
You have to be reliable. And that's the modern MO of what Howie Roseman has been doing, is guys have to remain healthy, right? Remember that post-it note he wrote 3 things on after the 2020 draft. They have to be able to run, they have to love football, and they have to be healthy. Nakobe Dean hasn't been healthy, and it's unfortunate. And maybe the teams that saw those health concerns going into the draft knew that it might not affect them right away, but it might be a lingering thing, that he is one of those quote-unquote injury-prone guys. And we've had plenty of injury-prone discussions on this show, especially over the years. But frankly, with the way that the linebackers played last year, with the 2 that you've gotten this year, being Cunningham and Nicholas Morrow, I'm with you to your point, what you said on the show the other day, that Howie Roseman is never going to spend even as high as a day 3 pick on a linebacker at this rate, because you're investing and he's not on the field. It's unfortunate, but that's the way it goes.
And you spend a third-round pick on Nakobe Dean, he doesn't do anything. Nicholas Morrow, you pay literally nothing. Zach Cunningham, you get off the streets at the end of July, and they were outperforming Nakobe. And that's the thing, is the injuries are the biggest part. He just has not been available enough. But even when he's on the field, he hasn't been terrible. But Gino, this was the first linebacker we started talking in star language for the first time in a long time. I never thought Nigel Bradham could become a star with the Eagles, or Jordan Hicks, or any of the guys that they've brought in over the years. Davion Taylor, even when they drafted him in the 3rd round. Nakobe Dean was the first guy I've thought maybe ever. At least, I don't know. You could go back to Jeremiah Trotter. It's been that long where I said this could be a potential 1st-round pick the Eagles would never consider taking, that slipped somehow to the 3rd round, and they could have accidentally fell into a star linebacker. That's who I thought Nakobe Dean was going to be. And again, the jury's still out on him. He has not played enough football to completely label him a bust, but injuries are a part of that label. Again, the best, it's such a cheesy saying, but the best ability is availability, and he has not been on the football field enough to even know if he can play.
And the thing about him, too, is he's undersized as well, right? He's not a guy that, if these injuries continue to go, he's going to hold up well over time. Exactly. Nigel Bradham was just made out of bricks. He was just always on the football field. And you kind of need that at linebacker, because if he's going to be your green dot caller and there's communication issues, well, it probably stems from having this guy be the one leading the way all off season, And then you get into the regular season and he gets hurt. And now you're moving that green dot all around to Reed Blankenship, to Nicholas Morrow, all throughout the defensive secondary. You need some sort of continuity there. And linebacker, you have to be a reliable football player. That's why TJ Edwards was so great, right?
Yeah.
He might not be the best. He might not be the most athletic, but he was going to be on the football field. He was going to make tackles for you. He improved in coverage as it went along. And Nakobe Dean, it is really unfortunate because you could go back 6-7 months on the show and we were talking about, is this guy the best talent that you have had at this position since, like you said, Jeremiah Trotter? We have to get into the discussion of, if they are going to go big on a linebacker, Lou, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. has to be in Philadelphia come next year. It's just written in the stars. But right now, I think the best path forward, Lou, and it might have been the best path forward. We had this discussion and people thought we were crazy saying, do you replace Nakobe Dean with the way that those two guys were playing? I think you should have just kept it going the whole way. Like, let that continuity continue through.
Nakobe wasn't even good when he was on the field, in coverage at least. He allowed a 92% completion percentage and a 102.4 passer rating. That's the third worst completion percentage allowed by a linebacker this year, with at least 100 coverage snaps. That's, again, when you're supposed to be the every down green dot linebacker, you have to be able to cover Gino. And Nakobe, that was his biggest issue. So this team, again, they're not being hurt by Nakobe's lack of production and injuries as much as we thought, considering they let both TJ Edwards and Kazir White walk this year with Nakobe Dean in mind. They only really brought in Nicholas Morrow, barely any money there, in March with Nakobe Dean in mind. That's how high they had of expectations for this kid, is they barely invested anything else in the position. And so it hasn't worked out, but luckily for them, it really hasn't hurt them as much as their investment showed, because Cunningham and Morrow surprisingly have been better than him and actually pretty good starters. I don't know, would you say just as good as, maybe not Edwards last year, but just as good as Kazir White? Like, they really haven't skipped a beat at this position.
I think Kazir White,
they were better, but these two were fine.
He would have been the perfect guy to sign back because he was cheap, and it would have been just a guy who actually, did he get hurt? I think he might be hurt this year, if I'm not mistaken, but just a guy that can be reliable for that low money value. And that's what Howie Roseman continues to do at this position. And if you are investing a third round pick, like you said, you are hoping that this guy can be everything that you want as an every down linebacker. One of the concerns I had especially was seeing teams in the division bringing guys like Jake Ferguson, like a Darren Waller. Is a 5'11" linebacker going to be able to cover these guys? And that's why we have seen Zach Cunningham maybe be the best option as a coverage linebacker, simply because he's dude, there was a picture of him.
He has the wingspan of a tree. It's unbelievable.
On the Associated Press from the other day, and he's just like towering over these defensive linemen. I never realized how big he was, but the way that they're playing and how little Howie's invested at that spot in the draft, and how good he has been, frankly, over the last couple of years of evaluating that position in free agency, in, I mean, the market right before summer. I mean, you're talking about Zach Cunningham being a guy that was brought in on that final week of the preseason, and the guy that was brought in with him, and Miles Jack, retired just like a week after that. They could have got just crapped out at this position. You would have been left with Nicholas Morrow, who, Lou, wasn't even on the roster. So the plan that they had was Christian Ellis and Nakobe Dean, and now both of those guys aren't reliable.
They got lucky. The plan totally failed. Luckily, it is not hurting 100%. Them pretty much at all. It'll be fascinating to see what they do down the road at this position. But, Gino, this is what we get for thinking we might have had a star at this position for the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm done really ever putting a lot of emotional stock into the linebacker position. Coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, we're halfway through the 2023 season. It's time for some mid-season awards. Guys, today's episode of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by Game Time. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sporting events, music, comedy, theater near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. It's the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see your view of the seat before you buy them, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. All-in prices show your totals up front, so you know you're getting a great deal without hidden fees, which we know with tickets, there's a lot of them. Buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Game Time is obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL in all caps for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. That's LOCKEDONNFL. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, Locked On is kicking up our coverage with Locked On NFL Kickoff Live. Each Friday, Locked On will go live at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on every Locked On NFL YouTube channel. Host Tanisha Batiste, Jarvis Davis, Kyle Krabs. They'll break down every game on the NFL slate to get you ready for your team's matchup, your fantasy lineups, betting angles, all that and more. Plus, get the in-depth local analysis from our stable of NFL hosts across the country who know these teams better than anybody else. Find Locked On NFL Kickoff Live every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on any Locked On NFL YouTube channel. All right, Gino, it's time for some mid-season awards. The Eagles are 8-1 atop the NFC and the entire NFL. They have the best record in football, the only team with just 1 loss. So let's take a look at who's been shining on offense and defense this year and special teams, who has been struggling. Want to get into some awards, mostly good, but there are some bad ones we're going to hand out as well. We both have winners for each of these. And I want to start with the non-quarterback offensive MVP because we know Jalen Hurts is the most valuable player on this entire roster. I think right now he's the MVP of the league. It's either him or Lamar Jackson. So let's take QB1 out of the equation. On offense, and there's a lot of good players in this unit, who do you think has been the most valuable player?
I think the easy choice is going to be saying A.J. Brown.
Yeah, I agree.
I think Lane Johnson has once again proved that he is the most valuable guy on this team. Because when Lane was out, look at how much it affected this football team, Lou. Yeah. It is too good to be true when he's in there that he is that dominant of a force on the right side. And he gave up his first sack in nearly 3 years this year. Okay, whatever. He's averaging .00001 sack that's allowed in the last 3 years of games. And the offensive line, it's just so predicated on what they do. And I think having Lane, yeah, you look at AJ in the season that he's having on the outside, but does Jalen have the time to go over 3 seconds in the pocket time and time again to be statistically the best pocket passer? Does AJ and DeVonta happen without the root cause, which is the offensive line?
Yeah, and its purest definition, most valuable player outside of Jalen Hurts. I would agree it's probably Lane Johnson. I got to give my vote to A.J. Brown, though, because even at times when this passing game wasn't consistent, the red zone offense was struggling, the one guy that if you just needed production, you went to A.J. Brown, and he's come through already over 1,000 yards this year, the fastest Eagle of all time to surpass 1,000 yards through just 9 games. I mean, breaking records. Maybe the best individual season we've ever seen from an Eagle so far that's not a quarterback. He has just been so – I can't believe how good he was last year, and the fact that he's topping that by a lot is truly unbelievable. But, yeah, I think those are your 2 main options, A.J. Brown, Lane Johnson, the most valuable players on offense outside of Jalen Hurts. Who would you say, though, is the MVP on defense?
This one is difficult because you could go a bunch of different ways with it.
Yeah.
Is it the guy who's made the most game-changing plays for you? Is it the guy who has affected the quarterback the most? I think Darius Slay definitely makes an argument to some degree. I think you're going to make a bet, though, that the defensive line is going to have the MVP right now.
Gotta be.
And there's one guy, I think, with the last question, I wanted to go a little bit different. But I just think there's a single guy on this defense that has been playing at a level which is just out of control. It's either got to be Haason or Josh Sweat, in my opinion.
My vote is Josh Sweat.
Okay, then I'll go with Haason Reddick because that duo deserves all the recognition.
I agree. I mean, Haason has been the best edge rusher in the fourth quarter this year, but Josh Sweat has been the best edge rusher, I think, in football consistently through 9 weeks. He is tied for the league lead in pressures. And Gino, Haason Reddick, again, the cast was on. That's why he wasn't very productive the first 3 weeks. But the fact of the matter is he wasn't that productive. And the Eagles needed Josh Sweat. Brandon Graham really was pretty quiet on the edge. He was the only consistent variable on the outside getting to the quarterback. He's been so good against the run. I just think he deserves his flowers. He's been your most consistent player on defense and one of the most consistent on your entire team. But yeah, it's got to be one of the two because Haason stepped up in the biggest moments in the closest games. That's been him too.
And the guys on the inside, that's not to take away anything that they had done.
Make the argument for Jalen Carter too.
You could. I think after last game, he kind of got a welcome to the NFL moment there a little bit going against Tyler Smith. But the guys on the outside, what don't they do? What don't they do? They make plays against the run.
Great, Gino, and you need these guys to step up even more.
Yeah, they pursue their rear ends off, man. I mean, how many times is Josh Sweat just making a backside tackle because he covers 7 yards with 2 steps? He's an unbelievable athlete. They lucked out drafting this guy, Lou, who was injured in college quite often. He has been on the field for them and a reliable weapon on the edge. That he is still young. He's not like BG where he's on the older side. He's not like Haason, who's more of your Sam Line. This guy is what you want in an edge rusher. I think he is sculpted from a lab in terms of what you want. You want somebody who could bend. You want somebody with length. You want somebody with power. You want somebody with speed. That's Josh Sweat. And then Haason Reddick, you got to sign these guys to tandem deals, in my opinion. Whatever these two are getting, just say, here's the contracts. You guys come in the same day. We'll sign you. The next 5 years you're here. You'll be 33. We'll renegotiate down the line.
Yeah, I agree. And you could make the case for Jalen Carter. Obviously, he's the rookie of the start so far, Gino. Not really a lot of competition. Nolan Smith's had a couple nice plays. Cindy Brown has definitely had more of a role as the weeks go on. But
I think
Carter
needs to be in there as well, in my opinion.
For rookie of the year?
Not rookie. I'm talking about overall.
We'll get in. Trust me, we're going to talk about Reed. You know what's funny? Speaking of Jalen Carter, I went back and watched one of those final plays. I think it was the Josh Sweat sack against Dallas. And on an defensive line with 2 top 10 edge rushers who we just talked about and a Hall of Fame defensive tackle in Fletcher Cox, Jalen Carter was the one on the biggest moment getting the double team. Isn't that incredible how he already has this Aaron Donald type of reputation through 9 games?
It's a testament to what they do. They draft very well on the defensive line, and they're not going to overthink it. I mean, how many teams overthought Jalen Carter? I mean, Detroit's kicking themselves. There's no way Detroit can be oh yeah, we made the right decision with Jahmyr Gibbs. No. That's not correct.
Carter's going to win Rookie of the Year, I think, for sure.
He has to. I mean, there's not even a question in my mind right now, especially because of the pundits who talk about defensive line play. I think when Brian Baldinger is pointing it out and a bunch of these guys that understand what it takes as an interior rusher, you're not always going to have the big time stats. I mean, heck, Quinnen Williams for the Jets signs this massive extension in the offseason. He doesn't have a single sack, but does that tell the story of what he does for the defense? I mean, look at Jordan Davis as well, Lou, right? Does that stat line talk about what Jordan Davis does? Absolutely not. And that's why with Jalen Carter, I mean, you talk about the double teams and his ability to beat them. He's only up there with the best of the best. You're talking about quite literally a generational type of player. When you are comparing him to Aaron Donald, it's like in hockey with Connor Bedard. You're comparing him to Connor McDavid. That only happens once every 10 years or so.
I agree. Let's keep this going, Gino. One more award before we take a break, and then we'll continue in segment 3. Who do you think has been the award going to the most underrated offensive player so far through 9 games?
I'm going to stick with the offensive line again. And it's been one guy who I think there's a big 3 on the offensive line, your 2 tackles and Jason. But there's another guy who's just so freaking good every single week. And Landon Dickerson, much like Josh Sweat, I don't think gets the recognition that he deserves. Because on the defensive line, it's they have BG, Fletch, all of these guys that you've been talking about forever. That's kind of how it is with Landon. I mean, another guy who was injured in college, really didn't even play his senior year until the last snap when he goes onto the field and they made a big to-do about it. Comes back, he's reliable, he's healthy, he looks the part being next to 2 of the better players in the league. You could really stick out like a sore thumb on this Eagles offensive line. And they've done a good job filling in the cracks, but all reliable has been Landon Dickerson, man. He's a freak when it comes to the run game. His pass protection has been unbelievable. He works in unison with Jason Kelsey and Jordan Mailata, the back of their hand. I mean, he was Jordan's best man in his wedding and vice versa. It's just cool to see them make these picks that a lot of people are like, why are you drafting Landon Dickerson in the second round, i.e. Lou DiBiase? And then we're sitting here saying, yeah, without this guy, are you winning a lot of these football games because your offensive line has been exceptional?
Yeah. My vote's going to go to DeVonta Smith. I think because of how dominant A.J. Brown has been, DeVonta's kind of gone under the radar, hasn't been getting as many consistent targets each week, but every time his number's called, I mean, this kid steps up. He's still on a 1,000-yard pace, already 4 touchdowns this year. DeVonta, and you see the leadership really stepping up this year. He was voted a captain in the offseason. Just been an instrumental piece that, again, should not go unnoticed. And there was some times A.J. Brown, week 2, wasn't as involved. Dallas Goedert for a couple weeks there. They could not get him involved. There's been times that DeVonta's had to carry as well, and I think he deserves his flowers too. So a lot of underrated players on this team because there's so many stars. We'll get into the defensive underrated player. More awards coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
Before we get into that, our friends over at DoorDash have a message for you here at Locked On Eagles. For all of you here listening, I'm sure you're on your phones all the time, and I'm sure, like me, you're always thinking about food. Quite literally, that's all I think about is food and when I got to record with Lou. And when I'm in a rush, I go to DoorDash. There's only one place I rely on, and you can as well. If you want to get a steak from De Rossi's, a pizza from Santucci's, if you want to get your groceries from Wegmans, you could do that as well. Get your favorite Wawa hoagie. I'm going to give you a deal today. Get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23. That's LOCKED23. Subject to change. Terms apply. But make sure you're not left out. Being hungry, go to DoorDash, get your food delivered right to your house, right in the middle of a game. Order it in the first quarter. It'll be there in the second quarter. It's easy. It's a flawless system, and I use it way too much, but that's not a bad thing because there are friends here at Locked On Podcast Network.
All right, midseason awards continuing right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Gino, we finished segment 2 with the most underrated player on offense. You went with Landon Dickerson. I went with DeVonta Smith. Let's continue that same topic on defense. To me, it's Jordan Davis. I think he's been the most underrated player on this unit because he's so instrumental in one area that the Eagles have been the number 1 defense in, and it's been stopping the run. And big number 90, everyone says it always starts with Jordan Davis. Nick Sirianni has said that the entire defense pretty much every time they're asked. And his pass rush production this year, again, we had the conversation all offseason, like, can he be a Vita Vea or a Dexter Lawrence where he grows in that way? Well, he has 2.5 sacks this year. He has at least a half a sack in 4 of 9 games. And his pursuit's been unbelievable. He's been equally as elite against the run. And again, there's just so many stars that are getting to the quarterback even more consistently on this unit that, he just kind of falls a little under the radar. But Jordan Davis has been, he's just so crucial to how this team works.
I think Ben Solak, former host of Locked On Eagles, his quote about him at the draft was perfect. He's a force multiplier. And what does that mean? It just makes everybody around you better. Lane Johnson in one of his post-game press conferences is like, do you see the guy? He takes up 3 freaking gaps. Yeah, and now he's taking up 3 gaps. Now you have one-on-ones all around the board. Your linebackers are able to crash. Look at how many times in short yardage situations Cunningham and Morrow are able to come downhill. Why? Because those guys are going to be in the right spot. And JD, man, he's looking good, Lou, even with a bummed hamstring where he was playing through it the last couple weeks. Great that we're at the bye and he can come back healthy because I think he's going to have a really good second half of the season, and he's in great shape. You could tell like you said, his pursuit might be the best thing about a guy who's 355 pounds. It's insane.
He chased down Dak Prescott last game with a bad hamstring. That's unbelievable.
Oh yeah, I've seen guys just like end their entire adulthood in like softball running down to first base, and this guy's chasing down Dak Prescott.
The size of a building, and he's chasing down Dak Prescott.
Yeah, quite literally.
Is he your vote as well?
I think I had 3 guys, and I think each position group kind of had one. Jordan Davis clearly was that guy for me, and I think you could make the argument for Milton, but at this point,
a shout out too. Fletcher Cox, you could even say Gino too, honestly.
Yeah, those guys are just perennial vote getters for like the underrated and MVP in my opinion. It was between Reed. If Reed stayed healthy the whole time, I was going to give it to him. But I think Zach Cunningham, what he has done,
love that pick.
It's such an adverse situation where you come into a room where you're not even the start. You're just more of a rotational piece at this point. And this is the third preseason game, and you're thinking, I might not even be with this team in a couple weeks.
Yeah, because
all of a sudden
it was
he's
him
here.
and Miles Jack. Like they said, hey,
Yeah.
the best man win. He wasn't guaranteed anything.
And then he comes into this room and he just continues to make plays. And in the preseason, we're like, okay, he could do a little something. Then Christian Ellis doesn't show up, and they put in Zach Cunningham. It's like, oh, this guy's pretty decent. And then all of a sudden, he's your best coverage linebacker last game for you. He is an unbelievable run defender. He's getting double-digit tackles time and time again. And he costs you next to nothing because you
Literally
got him
nothing.
The weekend before the season started.
I know. I agree. So for the next award, Gino, it's back to the offseason hype, and that was where I was going to put Reed Blankenship.
Oh, that's fair. Okay.
He was dominating this summer in training camp, but sometimes that happens and the guys don't come to fruition, especially an undrafted kid that flashed last year, but he barely played. It can happen to, Nakobe Dean this year was somebody that did not back the offseason hype. Blankenship, I believe, has the third highest safety coverage grade according to PFF. He has the most pass deflections of any safety. He's been as advertised and better. I mean, his play recognition, pursuit, his tackling, I can't believe how good he is, honestly. The fact that he was not drafted 2 years ago is unbelievable.
Middle Tennessee State, man. I mean, I can't believe this guy didn't get drafted. And the best thing about him, Lou, is his football IQ, right?
Yeah,
and with Chauncey,
sure.
With Chauncey, the playmaking came down to just a freak athlete, right? Like the guy is just an unbelievable football player. He was just going to make plays on the ball. Reed, we talk about not having a guy in the back end to make play. Reed has now stepped up twice this season in big moments for you and gotten interceptions, but it's not because he's the greatest athlete on the face of the earth. He's just so smart. We talk about having that continuity and guys that can make those calls. If I'm Sean Desai, I'm letting Reed Blankenship be my green dot caller because he sees everything.
I agree.
And you know how much I love safeties that can track on the back half and just go sideline to sideline. Reed Blankenship is that guy. He is that guy, man. He's the best of the bunch far and away. And to be an undrafted free agent, it's very similar to the situation with Cunningham. Like you come into a rookie training camp with 30 other guys. You're like, I don't even know if I'm going to have a job. And all of a sudden the guy's starting in the Super Bowl for you. And now he's the most underrated guy on the team on the back end, in my opinion.
Gino, for letdown of the half, who would you put there? Nakobe Dean's definitely one of them. We've talked about him a lot. Who else are you thinking?
Yeah, I think Nakobe for sure. I think James Bradberry from how good he was last year.
Comparatively speaking. Sure.
Like you're returning to the average more than anything, I would say, with him. I would have to say that it has to be somebody on the offense, though. And
Kenneth Gainwell will be my vote.
Yeah, like you talk about offseason hype and the letdown, Lou. Like
he was being called RB1 for months, and it was driving both of us nuts.
If they had the same narrative about, oh, DeAndre's the guy, like we're sitting him, like he's the guy, and he came out and performed like this, would be like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But it's like you're sending out Kenny Gainwell as like a dressed up Wendell Smallwood and trying to tell me otherwise.
Perfect way to put it. He does look like a dressed up Wendell Smallwood. 3.2 yards per carry this year. His EPA has been in the gutter. Yeah, and just all summer, people kept saying he's the lead workhorse in training camp. I'm like, get out of here. It's going to be DeAndre Swift, and that's been the case. And so, yeah, there's some letdowns. Kenneth Gainwell for sure because he got a lot of offseason hype. Gino, one more for you before we wrap up the show. Biggest question mark moving forward with one half of the season left. Who's a guy that, been up and down this year? Can he turn things around? Like the biggest question still that hasn't really been answered.
See, the thing with Kenny, as much as it is a letdown, it's like, okay, they have a stable of guys that you could probably get by there.
And we didn't think he was going to be, me and you at least didn't think he was going to be the star running back this year. So.
Right. And the same thing with Quez. It's like, but you're getting production elsewhere. I think James Bradberry is a true question mark of can you win with him, or is it going to be an in spite of type of thing?
Can he turn it around? Because he's been struggling the last 3 weeks.
And teams are going to see that. They're going to be like, what's the way forward? It's like, we're going to throw the football against the Philadelphia Eagles until they can stop us. And we're going to
target 24 on the outside.
And they're going to, but rightfully so, Lou. I think this guy who has made plays late in the fourth quarter, though, like continue to try him. And at some point.
That's why it's a question still for me. That's why he was my vote here. Because he has still made some big time plays this year. It's not like he's been, again, Devontae Bosby all year.
Right. And there was a moment in that game, and I think there were a couple boos towards his way, and I'm like, is this kind of what it's like when they gave the standing ovation to Trey Turner? Like, is this the turnaround time for him? Hopefully, like maybe this week off he gets back to normal, and they need him, and that's why I trust him to turn it around, and they need him. I wouldn't put this kind of onus on somebody that's like not a bit like, oh, the biggest question mark in the second half is can Nolan Smith get more than 10 snaps in a game? Like, no, absolutely not. It's a guy who can make or break in the biggest moment last year. It did make or break him on that side of the football. So you just have to hope he doesn't get into his head and let it snowball. I think as much of a pro as he is and how much of an up and down career he's had, this isn't the first time he's been in, let's say, a little bit of a cavern. And
after
I think he can come back out. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think that happened 2020. He had an all-pro year with the Giants. 2021, he stumbled, and then it's kind of been this repeat trend. 2022 is an all-pro, and now he's struggling again. So they need him, though, the second half of the year for sure. So definitely on the same page there. Let us know what you guys think. Hit us up on Twitter at LockdownBirds, at GC24_football, and at DiBiase LOE. That will do it, though, for today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. 2 more shows for you this week, though. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. Thank you so much for downloading, watching, and listening. And let's go, Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.